Good afternoon. I'm going to be talking to you today about mirrors and windows, or the cost of COVID isolation and our point of view. 50 years ago, in 1972, Michel Schiffer, a French adventurist and scientist, shut himself in a cave for 6 months, 205 days to be exact. He took meticulous notes documenting the effects of this isolation on his brain. After 2 months, he reported that he could no longer string thoughts together. 6 months in, he said that he was so desperate for companionship, he tried quite unsuccessfully to befriend a mouse. When COVID came upon us in March of 2020, we were all taken somewhat by surprise, even though we'd heard about its existence in China since January. We assumed that comfortable state of denial. What happened, though, was suddenly restrictions were put into place. We wore masks, we learned about social distancing, and we closed our schools, our workplaces, and our restaurants. Also, we discovered that we were at great risk of our health. So what happened was, in the face of this, we panicked. We rushed to the stores, and we stripped the shelves of toilet paper, food, and household cleaning products. Also, we were told that those who were immunocompromised, the elderly, or those with comorbidity issues like heart disease, obesity, or diabetes were at even greater risk. No matter who we are, no matter what our health situation, physically we were at risk. That changed our focus completely. For 2 years we stayed home. We turned to things like virtual learning, working remotely. We spent our holidays by ourselves, and on lesser important matters, we just gave up wearing makeup, we let our hair grow, and we stocked up on jigsaw puzzles. So in March of 2020, what we didn't know was we would have to live with some level of isolation for up to 2 years. Here's the problem with all of that, and it got lost. We are social beings. We are not just physical beings. Somehow, when we shut everything down, we were supposed to know how to handle our emotional beings without being together. Here's the problem with that. Humans are wired to be dependent on one another. We know innately if a baby cries, we're going to respond. We're going to rush to them. We're going to make sure they're fed, they're warm, and they have a dry diaper. Those are the physical triggers that exist within all of us. We all experience hunger, thirst, pain, temperature changes. When we feel those things, we know we need to eat. We know we need to have a drink. We need to grab a warm blanket. And we need to avoid painful situations. We also know that we have psychological triggers. Now, we don't pay as close of attention to them as we do to hunger, thirst. Those are acceptable things. But when we feel lonely or disconnected or depressed or have this feeling that we need to withdraw from social situations, those are also our triggers that remind us that we need to be together. We need each other. We have social structures built into our lives on a daily basis. We start out in a family. We all have a family. We start there, we socialize with our family. Then we gotta move on to the school community. In our school communities, we form clubs, we join a team, we wanna be with each other and share similar interests. There we not only survive, but thrive. Here's what happened. In light of COVID, what happens to the brain when you're warned that you're going to be physically affected in a negative way if you are with other people, is we begin to see each other as a threat. That's a really scary thing. But if you think about it, when COVID came upon us, if you're living in the same house with someone who has contracted COVID, your health is at risk. Their health is certainly at risk, and you're worried for them, but you also have this new notion that you're at risk as well. Say you're looking forward to getting together with a close friend, but you heard they were at the mall last night. You don't know if they had a mask or not. All of a sudden, you're thinking about that get-together in a very different way. They could be a threat to your health. One of the things we don't know yet is the cost of this isolation of COVID. But fortunately, a gentleman, a neuroscientist, John Cacioppo, who was at the University of Chicago for many years, did 2 decades of research on isolation and loneliness. And this is one of the things he had to say. When we are lonely, we not only react more intensely to the negative, we also experience less of a soothing uplift from the positive. If you take a minute and think about that, what that means is all of our negative feelings are heightened. All of those feelings we have that make us feel good and positive, those are dampened. So now we're living in an even more negative place inside our heads. Everyone knows being inside your head for too long is a very dangerous thing. John went on to define social isolation as the physical separation from others, which leads to a feeling of disconnectedness. So when we feel isolated, these are some of the things that happen. We feel depressed, we feel alienated, we feel oftentimes unworthy and helpless. No one wants to readily admit that to someone else. Those are seen as weaknesses. So now, not only are we trapped because we have to protect ourselves physically, we don't feel comfortable enough to share these feelings with each other. The other thing that happens with prolonged social isolation is that it can lead to clinical depression and also suicidal thoughts. And here's the really interesting thing, an increased risk of early mortality. So in John Cacioppo's studies, what he found is that people who live alone, people who spend prolonged periods of time socially isolated from each other, have an 18% higher risk of an early death. That's pretty significant. In the face of COVID, in March of 2020, our social structures crumbled. We no longer had those regular get-togethers within our communities. We couldn't even go to a restaurant. We weren't supposed to have our holidays together. Here's the thing. To take a 2-year timeout from being social beings costs us something. It costs us something emotionally, and it costs us our point of view. All of a sudden, we have a very narrow lens. Point of view. It's something we think about oftentimes when we read. As an author, I'm very, very invested in reading. Here are 2 things that happen to us. One of the things that happens when we read fiction is that we see mirrors of ourselves in characters. We are validated because they often have the same set of values that we do, and even if we haven't had quite the same experience, we can identify with them. So we feel validated and acknowledged. The other thing that happens, which is just as valuable, if not, in my opinion, even more valuable, is that we have windows. The windows that we have in fiction are those openings into a completely different point of view. Someone who thinks completely differently than we do and leads us down a completely different path in terms of their thoughts, their decision-making process, and where they finally wind up. So the benefits of looking at these multiple points of view, these are just a few of them. But here we've had this narrow lens since we've been isolated from each other. All of a sudden, when we get together again, we can widen our lens all over again. We don't want a new normal. We want to go back to the way things were when we were getting together on a regular basis. It helps us to problem solve when we talk to other people. When we have important decisions to make in our life, we certainly look to a friend for their opinion and their advice and their different perspectives. Because to make a decision, a life-changing decision inside a vacuum is a really, really bad thing to do. It's a bad idea. The other thing is that when we are sitting and exchanging ideas with each other, we are listening and understanding, and those are essential to our emotional health. What we don't know yet are the long-term effects of COVID. There's a professor at the University College of London, and she's done some very preliminary studies. So what she said is that we're seeing a really growing body of evidence that's showing how isolation and loneliness are linked with different types of disease and premature mortality. So they're finding, even within this 2-year span that we've been isolating from each other, that this is costly to our physical health as well as our emotional beings. What we do know is that being inside our own heads for too long is a dangerous, dangerous thing. The effects of isolation are both physical and emotional. Here's the thing, we have to be the change. We have to re-enter the world again. We have to change our view again and not see each other as threats, but once again, as part of our emotional well-being. We have to be connected to each other. We need other points of view, not just to survive, but to thrive as individuals. Important reminders. I came up with an idea the other day. Try on a fear anxiety meter. You know, we hear catastrophic news all the time, but think for yourself in the morning. How would I feel about getting on an elevator today? Would I get on an elevator with 12 people? Would I feel like I had to wait for the next elevator? How am I feeling about being out and in a crowd? Remember what I said about what John Cacioppo pointed out, is that when we are isolated, we feel the negative. We feel that at a much heightened rate. We have to remember what it was like when we used to look forward to face-to-face meetings. One of the things that I heard during COVID from many friends was, I can't wait to see you and give you a hug again. I think we all went through that. We have to look for hope and positivity, and we have to embrace the opportunity again for multiple perspectives. So the things that we can do next, we have to recognize and understand that we know a lot about how to remain safe. We make choices every day. We can mask, we can socially distance, we can vaccinate, we can boost, we can do all these things, but we know much more now about how to protect our physical beings. We also have to recognize that our hesitation to get back out into the world, it's perfectly normal. It's okay. Everybody is having that hesitation. But push yourself. Get out. Do something new. Come here today. That's part of your new thing to do, right? Get and give a hug. Hugs, 10-second hugs. And we forget about this. 10-second hugs get those endorphins going, those happy hormones going, where we feel loved, comforted, supported, and just generally happier. Enjoy seeing facial expressions again and body language. It's fun to see a friend you haven't seen in a long time and say, oh my gosh, I'd forgotten that about them. The other thing is we have to remember, just like when we were kids, if we fall off the bike, we get back on again. If we go out and things don't go perfectly the first time, that doesn't mean that's the way it will always be. Just keep in mind that what we've missed in point of view and getting multiple perspectives, that can come back to us and allow us not just to survive, but thrive. Thank you.